Hey everybody, this is Alexander Fitzgerald or Assassinato welcoming you to Button Brilliance. Let's get into this. You have the A6 offsuit on the button. I think most of you are raising this. You guys are deep, about 250 big blinds deep, and the small blind calls you. The board comes ace of diamonds, 7 of diamonds, 3 of diamonds, and villain 1 leads 4 big blinds into 7 big blinds on you. What would you like to do? Here? Would you like to fold, call, or raise? We go ahead and call here. The turn is the 2 of hearts. Villain 1 fires 9.5 big blinds into 15. Here, would you like to fold, call, or raise? Just a few more seconds. That is time. We're going to go ahead and fold here. So generally, we need to talk about donk bets because there's a lot of new people playing poker. There's a lot of people that got back into poker or started playing poker during 2020. They are bringing all their old habits from the 2000s into the game. And one of the habits you see a lot of people do is donk betting. What do they donk bet? Generally, so a lot of great players will donk bet in loose games just to get the party started in a multi-way pot. If they have a set, if they have a 2-pair, and they want to just get some chips in the pot and they know no one's going to take the donk lead seriously, they'll go ahead and fire out. However, when a more novice player, a more recreational player goes ahead and fires out into you, they're usually trying to figure out where they're at in the hand. So what this is for a recreational player oftentimes is a pair trying to figure out if it's good or not. So could this be a 7? Yeah, on occasion, this could be a 7. Could this be a king of diamonds just trying to see if you'll fold? Yeah, that happens. Could this also be an ace? Yeah, that's going to happen a decent percentage of the time. An ace will lead out here. Well, you beat the king of diamonds. You beat the 7, so you go ahead and call here. Now, something you need to know about a lot of loose, mediocre opponents is they tend to give away their hands with how much they donk lead. So if they have, say, like a 7-5 of hearts here, and they just want to test the waters, they might bet like 2 big blinds or 2.5 big blinds. If they have an ace and they're feeling a little bit better about it, they will go ahead and bet a little bit larger. Now, you don't know exactly if they're doing that right now, but that's something to keep in mind. So you go ahead and call right here. And on the turn, he actually fires a pretty serious bet amount, about 2/3 pot, around that amount. And here, whenever you're doing a big call, you have to ask yourself, does my opponent do this with X? And X is the best hand that you beat. So do you think this is ace-5? Well, this is a pretty strong way to play ace-5. And you got to also ask yourself, you have to also ask yourself, is this a draw? So is this the king of diamonds? It's possible, but you're not sure about it. One of the ways you'll lose a lot of money in no limit hold'em, both tournaments and cash games, is just overextending yourself with one pair when you're not really sure what your opponent is doing. Typically, if you game select well, which you should be doing because 90% of your job is game selection, if you're game selecting well, you don't need to overextend yourself here with these weak pairs. So we go ahead and fold right here. We have the 10-7 of clubs. Villain 15 opens. Villain 15 is a slightly more aggressive opponent. We don't know a ton about them. You guys are about 170 big blinds deep. What would you like to do with the 10-7 of clubs? We go ahead and 3-bet here. to 10 big blinds, and villain 15 calls. The board comes, king 8-3, villain 15 checks to you here. Here, would you like to check or bet? If you did want to bet here, how much did you want to bet? You got to always specify the bet amounts. So we bet about 8 big blinds, and this person folds. So this is one of the fastest ways you can make more money from the button. So first of all, you should take it personally if somebody opens ahead of you when you're on the button. They think you're weak. They think you're not going to do anything about it. That should offend you. Honest, I'm not joking right now. So I'm joking a little bit, but seriously, most people open the hijack too much and the cutoff too much. And if you're really able to play that button, they should not feel right about doing so. So you guys are very deep stacked here. So that open size doesn't really mean much of anything. This hand works really well as a bluff because it's not quite good enough to cold call. So let's say you had a 7-8 of clubs here or a 10-9 of clubs. Those hands, those prime suited connectors, they flop very well. They do really well in multi-way pots. In multi-way pots, if the pot gets big, the average winning hand is going to be 2 pair sets, straights or flushes. 10-9 suited, 9-8 suited makes a lot of straights or flushes, so that's pretty nice. However, 10-7 suited, a little bit more goofy, doesn't flop as many great combinations, not as good for a cold call of the 3.5x. However, this is a fun hand to 3-bet with because oftentimes when you flop a little something with it, your opponent's range is pretty weak. So in this particular case, when you 3-bet here and they just call, villain 15, there's a chance they would have 4-bet with the aces or kings. So you can start ruling out the aces or kings. They might 4-bet with the ace, king, and the queen. So you can somewhat rule out those combinations. Now let's pretend the board came 9 of clubs, 6 of clubs, 4 of hearts. And they check to you, you bet, and then they called. Well, on a board like 9 of clubs, 6 of clubs, 4 of hearts, you would think, wouldn't this person check raise a set of 9s? Wouldn't this person check raise a set of 6s? Wouldn't this person check raise a lot of sets and just to get more money in the pot, just to protect their hand, just to get value from their hand? A lot of North American players primarily struggle with slow playing a lot when there's flush draws and straight draws on the board. So they tend to fast play their hands, and that helps you because if they would be 4-betting their over pairs and if they're check raising their sets in 2 pairs, that means on a lot of the boards where you have some kind of a draw, you know they're capped at 1 pair. So if those turn cards are over cards that are really bad for their pairs, you can keep firing. Now, additionally, a lot of the times, the board is going to come something like this, king 8-3. If the board only comes with 1 card higher than a 9, and that card is not an ace just because the ace is so much more popular, if this card comes with if this board comes with just 1 card higher than a 9, it's not an ace. Generally, your opponent has missed. It depends on how you range him, but about 50% of the time is a fine estimate. So if you bet 1/3 pot, and this isn't exactly 1/3 pot, but just for the case of the argument, if you bet 1/3 pot, that bet is a complete bluff, would need to work about 25% of the time. And if your opponent is missing 40, 50, 60% of the time, depending on how often you think they're raise calling, you're in pretty good shape right here. And you've manufactured a nice pot with 10 high. This is the fundamentals. This is the bread and butter. This is how you get ahead in no limit hold'em. You don't need a hand to win a pot. You just need to put yourself in a situation where it's very likely your opponent has high cards they can't defend out of position. And the fastest way to do that is to play your button aggressively versus hijack or cut off openers who are opening too much, which is to say most people, because most people really struggle to open a disciplined range especially in North American poker. So here you have ace jack of diamonds. Villain 19 has opened. It is on you. What would you like to do? Fold, call, or raise? We call here, and the small blind calls. The board comes ace, king, 5. Villain 17 checks. Villain 19 fires 6 big blinds into 8.5. What would you like to do? Fold, call, or raise? We call here. Small blind calls as well. The turn is the 6 of diamonds. Villain 17 checks. Villain 19 fires 11.5 and then 26.5. It's on you. What would you like to do? Fold, call, or raise? In general, we went over this earlier. You want to be careful about overextending yourself with one pair. If you're playing a multi-way pot, deep stacked, the one pair is going to be the most expensive hand, because if a pot gets big, multi-way, generally you're looking at a 2-pair, a set, a straight, or a flush. So what do you have to ask yourself here in this situation? You have to ask yourself, does my opponent here, does Villain 19 do this with X? And X is the best hand that you beat. So is Villain 19 firing ace 10 here? Second question you have to ask yourself is he doing this with a hard draw? Because that's about the one draw you beat. Now, here, do you think he's firing a hard draw? It's totally acceptable to go, I don't know. That's fine. Do you think he's firing ace 10? That seems like a very aggressive play to do with ace 10. Generally, in multi-way pots, if you're not dealing with supervillains, if you're not dealing with virtuosos, if you're not dealing with excellent professional players, if you're just dealing with average regulars, or if you're just dealing with recreational players, you have to trust the double barrel in a multi-way pot, because most people do not fire into multiple players, get called by multiple players, and then on the turn go, you know what I want to do again? Fire as a bluff or fire thin. I bet that'll really help me. So generally, most people overextend themselves here. Honestly, if you call here, how often do you really think the river is going to go check, check? A large percentage of the time, you're going to be facing another bet. If this guy just fired into multiple people twice, he clearly has the chutzpah to go again. You're not calling another barrel, right? Just go ahead and save the bet right now if you're planning to fold the river anyway. And don't forget, you have the small blind to deal with as well. That's not nothing. So here you have king jack of diamonds, and there have been 3 limpers. It is on you. Would you like to fold, call, or raise? General caliber of player, most of these concepts so far, actually all of them have been pretty universal, but these are just generic regulars in North America. That's what you're dealing with here. Nobody that technically sound, nobody that proficient, nobody that good, nobody who should be scaring you. So you raise with king jack of diamonds. How much did you want to raise here? So there's about 4.5 big blinds in the middle. You want to double that. You don't want to bet 5. You don't want to bet 6, because that's a sweetener now. You're just going to get called by the whole table. If you want that to happen, that's fine. But if you want anybody to fold, you got to go 2 times what's out there. So we make it 9 big blinds and we get called by 1, 2, 3 players. And it gets checked to us on this flop, the queen 8-7 board. Here, would we like to check or bet? We check here. The turn is the 3 of diamonds. Everybody checks again. It's on you. What would you like to do? Check or bet? Okay. So if you want to fire 15 or 25 here, ask yourself, always make sure there's a purpose for every bet. You don't want to bet without a purpose. So is this a value bet or is this a bluff bet? Well, obviously, this is a bluff bet. You have king high. So if you're betting 15 or 25, you got to ask yourself what's going to fold. Do I think an 8 or a 7 is going to fold? You should bet something like 47 big blinds here. Now, is this totally unbalanced? Yeah. It's also going to work. Oops. You get called. The river's the 9 of diamonds. Ha ha. He checks. It's on you. Check or bet. What would you like to do? 132 big blinds out there. So we bet 48 big blinds here and we get paid off and bang, bang. There we go. So here, let's discuss what happened. So what's the best hand anybody has on this turn? So they all check twice. So everybody checked to you on the flop. Everybody checked to you on the turn. I'll be honest with you, you're not repping much, but it doesn't matter because most people are not brave enough. So I went 100% on my overbet bluffs like this year at the series. People will know what you're doing, growl at you, glare at you, and then they're going to huff and puff and fold most of the time. They all check twice. That's not going to be a queen most of the time. Most of the time, top pair would have fired by turn. They usually don't check the top pair twice. So what you're most likely going up against are some pairs underneath the queen. 8x makes sense. 7x makes sense. Jacks, 10s, and 9s make sense. And this bet actually does not need to succeed that much. So if you bet just a hair over, say, pot, it's going to be a little bit more than 50% of the time it needs to work. If you bet 1.5x pot, it needs to work 60% of the time. If you bet 2x pot, it needs to work 66% of the time. So what ends up happening here is people have their 9s or they have their little ace 8 and they're pretty suspicious of what you're doing, but a lot of the time they just get weirded out and they go ahead and fold. And the hand's not over should you get called. You still have a lot of outs. A king might be an out if you get called here. A diamond is obviously an out. Now, if you don't have a great reason to bet large on the river, just go ahead and bet small. So for most of your opponents, if you bet 0 to 50% pot on the river, that's going to look like 0 to them. They're just going to go, well, I called the overbet on the turn, so I obviously can't fold at this point. So it's pretty much free money at this point that the person's going to go ahead and call on this river. So that being said, if you wanted to bet larger here, you got to ask yourself, well, how sure are you of your range on that turn? The person checked twice and then called. That's usually going to be a pair that's hero calling. Just that got suspicious and decided, okay, I have to go ahead and call here. I think this is a draw a lot of the time. I think this person's trying to take this pot because this could be someone who was trying to slow play and wanted somebody to barrel on the turn. But I think actually this person is actually trying to take this pot away from me. So we go ahead and just secure. If we just really think that person still has like tens or jacks or like ace eight or something like that, we do the bet that everybody really struggles to fold against, which is 0 to 50% pot, and we do get paid off right here. So yeah, continuing, we have ace five of hearts, and there's one limper, fold, call, or raise. Yeah, a lot of the times live, you'll get a lot of people complaining and saying how dumb the bet is. Then you'll get the begrudging fold. Every once in a while, though, people do look you up. So if you get lucky on that river, you got to know what you're doing. If you don't know exactly what to bet, if you bet like 40% pot, they just never seem to fold. So we go to about 2 times what's out there, about 6 big blinds. And the small blind calls us, and the board comes ace 5-4. Small blind goes ahead and checks you. It's on you. Check or bet. If you do want to bet here, you must specify an amount. Just go big. We go big. He calls. Turns the 4 clubs. He checks to us. Check or bet. We fire 26.25 big blinds, and this person calls. The river is the ace of clubs. They check to us. Check or bet. We move all in, and we do not get paid on this one. So, guys, let's talk about how basic players play. I assume most of you are playing basic players. I assume most of you are not playing higher stakes. Most of you are playing low to mid stakes, usually with a lot of people who know a couple of things about poker, but maybe not a ton. And here's what they're going to do. If they have a flush draw, they'll probably call whatever you put out there. If they have an ace, they're probably going to call whatever you put out there. If they have a pocket pair, you might lose a little bit of action if you bet bigger here. Like if they have like 6 7s or 8s, you might lose them if you bet a little bit bigger here. But most of your opponents hate having pairs on the flop, seeing draws out there, and then folding to the first bet. So you can load up. When you flop top 2 pair, you can load up right now because the flush draws, the straight draws, the top pairs are not going to fold you, and maybe even some of the second pairs. Now on the turn, all the straight draws and flush draws miss. So it's very likely the flush draw will call again just because bad players love to see if their draws hit, and nothing you do is going to get them to fold. And 6 7 you might lose right now, but the ace is probably not going to fold for anything just because they see those missed straight draws and flush draws. So we go ahead and bet bigger here, and we set up that river jam. And now if they have an ace, they have aces full of 4s, and we obviously have aces full of 5. So we go ahead and jam here just to get that value. We're obviously not getting anything more from the flush draw. So here we go. Continuing, we have 7 6 of clubs. There's one limper. What do you do here? Go to about one of the easiest ways to make more money from the button is to raise isolate from the button. So we raise to 5x. So we raise to 5x, and villain 22 calls. The board comes ace 10 7. It's been checked to you. By the way, if you're ever questioning if you should slow play versus recreational opponents, remember, big bets scare them. They have a really hard time putting in big money. So you usually have to put in the money for them. So I would generally tell you not to go ahead and trap versus them. We check here. The turn is the Jack of Diamonds. Villain 22 checks to you. Check or bet. We check here. The river's the 2 of clubs. He checks to you. Check or bet. We check here. You had a little bit of showdown value. You decided to try to get it to showdown value. Yeah, you hit that flop pretty well. You've got the aces in your range, the 10s in your range. I see that, but you don't need to go flying at it this one particular time. Give them an easy pot. For some reason, that calms some of the weaker recreational players down if you check it down just once. You have the ace king on the button. There's 3.5 big blinds out here. What do? You go to 2 times that. So we go to 7 big blinds. One of the most profitable plays you'll ever do is isolation raising on the button. If you can get position, bigger pot, superior hands, heads up, you're going to make a lot of money in no limit hold'em. So we raise to 7 big blinds. The board comes king 5-7, and villain 19 goes ahead and bets 11.5, and villain 24 folds to you, and it is on you. Would you like to fold, call, or raise? We call here. The turn is the 2 of diamonds, and villain 19 fires 16.5 big blinds into 45.5. Here, do you want to fold, call, or raise? We raise the 41 big blinds. He calls. The river is the 10 of diamonds. Villain 19 checks to you. Check or bet? Must specify an amount if you want to bet. We fire 42.5 big blinds into 127.5. Please compare your bet size or lack thereof to what you see on the screen. And he calls and bang, bang. Remember when I told you about they give away their hands? This is a classic example. So we get an early position limper, as what happens in a lot of loose games across the United States, cash and in tournaments. You get a lot of people limping too much. And you raise the 7 big blinds, they just call. And they donk lead out here. Now, they donk lead about a half pot. We're not really sure what that means. So we just go ahead and call. And on the turn, this is where he kind of gives away his hand. There's a flush draw out there. There's some straight draws out there. If he had a set, or a 2 pair, he might be hoping you have top pair and you're really willing to pay him off. He might bet a little bit bigger. And he's wanting to protect his hand from a draw a lot of the time because a lot of North American players really overvalue that. So most likely he's giving you an idea of, okay, I like my hand. I want to triple barrel it and keep this pot small. Thank you very much. I don't want this pot to get too big. I'm going to bet something small to slow you down. And that's your opportunity to decline. Now, luckily for you, most North American competition, I know a lot of you guys live in the United States and Canada. When you raise here, if they do have the set, they'll raise again just because, oh, wow, I got raised on the turn. This guy really wants to go. Let's put the money in. So when you get called here, you're pretty golden. And the river come in with the flush draw is not terrific for us. But if you're ever unsure of what is going to call you, I would say bet. Essentially, if you bet 1/3 pot, it looks like 0 to them. They feel really stupid if they fold to 1/3 pot. They feel really weak if they fold to 1/3 pot. The biggest fear most of your opponents have, because most of your opponents are stations, the biggest fear most of them have is getting bluffed. If somebody shows them a bluff, they feel awful. Nobody wants to be embarrassed on their day off. So generally what they do is they call a little too much. They're always worried if they just put a little bit more money in the pot, they would have won a huge pot. So if you bet that 1/3 pot on the river, they're going to go ahead and call you far too much. Here you have pocket fours. There's 2 limpers and 1 raise by Villain 22. What would you like to do here? We go ahead and call. If we're going to call on the button, we're going to be playing mostly multi-way pots because it's really likely there's going to be other callers behind us, given the good price. So when we cold call on the button, we need to know our hand does really well in multi-way pots. And in multi-way pots, if they get big, generally the winning hand is going to be 2 pair sets, straights or flushes. So you're looking for hands that make those kind of hands. So that's going to be pocket pairs, suited broadways, suited aces, suited connectors. So we go ahead and take a flop because this fits in the category. The board comes queen 3-2. Villain 21 checks, villain 22 checks. It's on you, check or bet. We bet about 1/3 pot on this board, and we get called. The turn is the king of spades. Villain 22 checks to us. It's on us. Check or bet. We fire 20 big blinds here. And villain 22 folds. So let's break down this hand. So here, in most multi-way pots, your opponents are going to subconsciously assume somebody has something, especially your lower stakes opponents. And to be fair to them, usually in a multi-way pot, somebody does have something. So if they have just a random high card, unless it's like the ace of spades, they're usually just going to fold to the first bet that gets put out there. With pairs, they don't want to fold because recreational players hate folding pairs, and with draws, they never want to fold because they're really hoping they can hit a big pot. They can hit a big hand, and then they could win a big pot. And with 2 pair or better, they're usually going to fast play to protect their hand and simultaneously get value from their hand. So typically in multi-way pots, your opponents are going to fold their high cards, call with their pairs, call with their draws, and raise 2 pair or better. So here you have fours. You likely have the best hand right now. You're not likely to get value from anything worse if you fire out here, but you do have the benefit of folding out a lot of hands that have really good equity versus you. So let's say this guy has like 10-9 of clubs and he's willing to fold to the first bet. That hand actually has a lot of equity versus you. And it would be great if we folded that out, or an ace-10 or an 8-9 or something like that, that has overcards and backdoor draws and whatnot. So we go ahead and fire small here. We fire 1/3 pot because that bet needs to work, or roughly 1/3 pot, because that bet is a total bluff, needs to work 25% of the time. So both of these players collectively would need to be defending about 75% of the time in order to discourage us from doing that with any 2 cards. They're probably going to come close to that, but not quite. Now, when you get check called here, it's really likely a queen would have led out into you with the flush draws and straight draws out there. They would have led to get value from their hand and to protect their hand. It's really likely sets would have done that as well. And yeah, the overpairs are not that likely just due to the pre-flop play of the hand. Villain 22 just cold called pre-flop. So overpairs are not that likely. Top pairs not that likely. Sets probably lead with the flush draws and straight draws out there to protect their hand and to get value from their hand. So what this most likely is ace-3, ace-2, 5, 6s, 7s, 8s, 9s, 10s, maybe the ace of spades on occasion. And anyway, this turn card is pretty bad for all of that. He's got to flush some percentage of the time, although we would assume he would fire with his flush draw some percentage of the time. And every flush draw combination you can think of is only one combination, versus he had, like, if he just flats with all of his ace kings pre-flop, that's 16 combinations to start the hand. So isn't that likely to have a flush. He does have it a smaller percentage of the time, but most of the time, this is just a terrible card for his mediocre pairs, for his ace three, for his ace two, for his sixes, sevens, eights, nines, tens that we're trying to get to a cheap showdown. So we go ahead and fire here on the turn, and we collect nicely. So here we have eights. He could have some queens there. Sometimes people check with the queen multi-way, but we have a river to play. We could do that as well. We could keep firing. So continuing, here, there's 4.5 big blinds in the middle. You have pocket eights. We go ahead and raise here to 9 big blinds, and we get called by the initial limper. The board comes 9-8-7. Villain 19 checks to you. It's on you. Check or bet. We fire a little bit bigger. Please compare your bet size to the one you see on the screen. So there's 21.5 big blinds in the middle. You flop middle set. Did you want to bet bigger here? So he check raises. It's on you. What would you like to do? We move it all in, and he calls, and he does not get there with his draw. Bang, bang. It's all yours. So continuing. So you got to look at every board and ask yourself, is this a board where heads up people like to call with their high cards? Or is this a board where people will usually continue with just pairs or better? If it's a board where people aren't going to continue with high cards, so what's a board where people continue with high cards? Let's say the board comes like King 2-4. That's a board a lot of people like to continue with ace high or even just some broadways, because you either have the king or you don't in their mind. Here, an 8-7-9 board, it's a little more likely someone with just a random ace high or a king high is going to go, okay, I bet you have a little something there. Now, if you're value betting on the King 2-4 board and you want to go a little bit smaller exploitatively to get value from all those ace highs and just broadways, that's a fine idea. Now here, if you want to get value and you believe that most recreational players can't fold to the first bet if their life depended on it, because, if I'm just going to fold to the flop bet, what the hell am I even doing here? So if you believe your opponent is only continuing with pairs and they're not likely that sensitive to the first bet size, go ahead and load up here. And this is something you'll see a lot in cash games. When somebody's short stacked and they've got any kind of draw, or what they perceive to be as short stack because everybody else has more chips, they're far more likely to just get it in right here. So here with the middle set, yeah, you're running it into Jack 10 some percentage of the time, but you got to put it in right here. And sure enough, we did catch this person goofing off, although that turn did scare us. You got a couple more limpers. It's on us. You got the Queen Jack of Diamonds, 3.5 big blinds in the middle. What would you like to do? You should be raising position, bigger pot, superior hands, heads up. You're going to make a lot of money if you can line up all of those factors. PBSH. PB Sandwich is an easy way to remember it. Small blind calls you. The board comes 10-9-4. Small blind checks to you. It is on you. Check or bet. Please compare your bet size to the one you see on the screen. You bet about 7 big blinds into 17. He calls. The turn's the Jack of Hearts. It gets checked to you. Here, would you like to check or bet? We fire 10 big blinds into 30.35. We fire about 1/3 pot. He calls. River's the 7 of diamonds. He checks to you. Check or bet? We fire 16.87 into 50.6, and he calls. And don't be shocked. Don't be shocked. You'll see all. By the way, when you're playing in your local casino and the guy folds, you don't know what he's calling with. you'd be stunned to know what a lot of people call with. So everything I'm teaching you is based on the fact that is based on my experience over the last 20 years. Almost every single morning I've taught poker to people. And there's certain things that people have problems with. And you can exploit that. One thing that most recreational players that you will face in casinos in the United States struggle with is folding one pair in any sense, and also turning pairs into bluffs. They really struggle with that. So here we have, so we go ahead and fire on this board. You could really get away with pretty much any kind of bet. This is a pretty good board for you. You raised on the button. I guess villain 17 might just flat with 10s or 9s. So I guess they could have sets. But once they call you on a board with flush draws and straight draws, it's possible they would have raised to get more value from their sets in two pairs and to also protect their hands. So they check call you here. So that's really likely to be clubs or just one pair, a 10 or a 9. Now you're beating most of that on the turn. So the question is, what's the most a 9 will pay? The question is, what's the most that ace 4 will pay? Now you might think that's crazy, but if you play enough live at low to mid stakes, I assume most of you play low to mid stakes. So this is geared more for low to mid stakes. So when you bet this small on this turn, they should be asking themselves, is that really how big he would bet if he had king, queen? Or if he had some kind of monster? Wouldn't he be worried about the flush draw coming in? I think this person capped their range. I'm going to turn my pair into a bluff, or or whatever it is. But they're not going to do that. Yeah. They're just not going to do that most of the time, because the most embarrassed most people have ever felt at a poker table is when they got caught bluffing. So they seek to not do that anymore. So usually what they're going to do here with a club draw, with a 9, with a 10, is they're just going to say to themselves, well, hell, it's really cheap, and I want to see what he does on the river. And then on the river, when the flush draw misses, and once again, you bet 1/3 pot or 25% pot or whatever it is, and that looks like 0 to them because they'll feel really stupid if they fold, and it turns out you just had a couple of clubs. You're going to get looked up a lot. Yeah. Continuing. We have 9s, and villain 21 limps in. We're going to go ahead and keep establishing position, bigger pot, superior hands, heads up. You make it 5 big blinds to go, and villain 21 calls you. The board comes king 5-2. He leads 7 big blinds into you. Here, would you like to fold, call, or raise? We call here. The turn is the 6 of hearts. He fires 15 big blinds into 25.5. It is on you, fold, call, or raise. What question do you ask yourself? Does he do this with X? X in this situation would be pocket 8s. Do you think he donk led the flop so he could donk lead a little bit larger on the turn with pocket 8s? Maybe, maybe not. I doubt it. Does he have any missed draws here? Well, I guess he could have a random ace of hearts, but I don't know. Generally, you're just going to go ahead and fold here. Don't overextend yourself with one pair. That's how most people lose their butts in No Limit Hold'em is, I don't know what to do. I like my hand. It's a good pair. It should be good. I call down. Oh, no. What in the world? 2 limpers. What do? Position, bigger pot, superior hands, heads up. 2 times what's out there. So villain 23 goes ahead and calls you. The board comes 10-8-7. It's been checked to you. Here, would you like to check or bet? We fire 5.5 big blinds into 16.5. He calls. The turn is the 6 of clubs. He checks you. It's on you. Check or bet. We fire about 20 big blinds into 27.5, and he folds. So this is a great spot to double barrel. So this is one of those boards where, so you're playing in North America, you're playing in some small casino, or you're playing, hell, you could just be playing in Vegas with Taurus. You got a bunch of limpers, you ISO raise. It's not going to get through because somebody always wants to see the flop. The board comes 10-8-7. That's one of those boards where people usually need a pair to continue. If someone's just got a random ace-5, they're going to look at that board and go, well, that's pretty coordinated. He might have some of that. So generally, what's going to call you here is going to be a pair. So you fire out here, and you get called. There's a straight draw, pretty obvious straight draw out there, so it's possible he might have fast played with some sets, some two pairs. Maybe not, maybe sometimes. Some people like to protect their hands. Some people see monsters under the bed. Some people are super scared about turn bets. So a lot of people don't like to see big turn bets when a draw comes in. So when he check calls you here, most likely he's going to have a 10, 8, or a 7. Now on this turn 6 of clubs, he doesn't have a 9 the majority of the time. And this is a really bad card if he's got like Jack 10 or Queen 10 or King 10 or Ace 8 or King 8 suited, or an Ace 7 suited, or a 7-5 suited, or something like that. So a lot of the times you are going to get a lot of these mediocre pairs to go ahead and fold to you bet. Now, if you bet, let's say half pot, that bet needs to work about a third of the time. But again, a majority of the time, this person doesn't have a 9 there. So you're going to get a lot of hands, even some top pairs on occasion, to fold to you here. So you end up picking up the pot. Here you have King, Queen of Spades, and cutoff goes ahead and raises to 4 big blinds. It's on you. What would you like to do? You can pretty much do anything here, and it's right. If you want to call and take a flop because the hand makes nut straights, great flushes, yeah, it plays really well multi-way. If you 3-bet to get more money in the pot because you most likely have the best hand, that's fine. Let's go ahead. So small blind goes in and calls you here. So the board comes King 8-9. Small blind checks. Villain 24 checks. It's on you. Would you like to check or bet? We fire 5 big blinds out there. And Villain 17 calls. And Villain 24 check raises. It is on you. Full call or raise. You're going to be folding this hand most of the time. So you might be, so the name of the game is not put your opponent on one hand, you beat, and then call. If the game were that easy, everybody would win. You got to think about the range here. So first of all, ask yourself, Villain 24. Does Villain 24 here do this with X? And X is the best hand that you beat. So does he do this with King Jack? That would be wildly overplaying King Jack. He's most likely not doing that. Okay, is he doing that with a draw? Well, that's really overplaying a Jack 10 too. So most people don't do that. Most people like just calling and seeing if they can hit their draws, especially if you're dealing with recreational opponents across North America. They're going to like to just call with their straight draws and mediocre flush draws. So they might be fast playing a couple. I mean, they might be bluffing with a couple of flush draws. But remember, every flush draw combination you can think of is only one combo. So generally, you've just run into it here. This is somebody who's trying to trap you with 8s or something like that. You don't need to give them more money. If you do not know what to do not put money into the pot. You should never invest in anything you don't know about. We fold there. And just if you're playing cash games in the United States, guys, and you're playing 1-2, 1-3, 2-5, there's so much free money out there. All you got to do is sit there and play position, bigger pot, superior hands, heads up, and hand read to some degree. and you'll be fine and you'll make money. All you have to do is not overextend yourself. So we make it 5 big blinds here. So this is not a superior hand, but if you can get 3 out of 4, position, bigger pot, heads up will generally work if you got half a hand. So this is clearly not a superior hand, but we'll work with it. So the board comes king, king, 9. Villain 23 checks. Here, do we want to check or bet? We bet small, just try to take it. He calls. The turn's the 5 of hearts. He checks to us right here. Check or bet. We fire again, about half pot, and he goes ahead and folds. So this is a board that people like to call with high cards. Why do they like to call with high cards? They like to call with high cards because they're thinking you either got a king or you got nothing, and there's already 2 kings on the board, so it's pretty likely you have nothing. I bet my ace high is still good. Or I want to see if I can draw to my queen jack or my jack 10 or my queen 10 or whatever it is. And then when you fire again on the turn, they go, all right, all right, all right. I bet you have it. You bet half pot on that turn. That bet as a total bluff only needs to work about 1/3 of the time. So it's a nice little bet for you right there, considering how often you're going to catch him with a high card, which is a higher percentage than that. You have king, queen offsuit on the button. It's been folded to you. You raise on the button. Small blind calls you. The board comes king, 8-3. Small blind checks to you. It is on you. Would you like to check or bet? Well, clearly most of you are firing here. So we fire. We'll do the small little bet that everybody likes. So we go 2.3 big blinds. The turn's the 2 of spades. Small blind checks to you. Check or bet. We fire about 8 big blinds into 11.67, and he calls. The river is the ace of hearts. Villain 17 checks to us. Check or bet. It's on us. We fire 9 big blinds into 27, and he calls, and bang, bang. If you're pretty sure you have the best hand, you should be allergic to checking back the river. You are not value betting enough until you accidentally value bet the second best hand. So when you're dealing with recreational players, and you can play against recreational players online still, I got a win rate I was very happy with on one such site. And live, you'll just see people all over who are like this. So first of all, when they call from the small blind, that means next to nothing. That means I have 2 cards I want to see the flop with. So you fire on this flop. This is a board a lot of people will just call you with random high cards. So if you want to get those random high cards to pay you off, fine. Now on this turn, he's probably going to fold the high cards, but the pairs are going to pay you off because they can put you on a spade draw. They can put you on a diamond draw at this point. Whenever there's a draw out there, most of your recreational opponents are going to go, I bet it's a draw. I call, because that gives them a license to keep gambling. So we fire, and small blind calls. And on the river, obviously that's not the river we were rooting for, but there's still the missed flush draw out there. And most of your opponents are just going to see those missed diamonds, and they're not going to want to fold any king, and a lot of pairs even under that. So we go ahead and go real thin, and we get to see the cards today. A lot of the times they get to just muck and not be embarrassed, but trust me, they'll get pretty pissed off if they see what you value bet on the river. They're hoping for you to have an excellent hand or nothing. So if you have nothing, they get that little heroin high that people get when they make a good call on the river. Just everybody at the table, nice call, thank you, thank you. A lot of people enjoy that. They get a lot off of that. If you just have a random ace 8, they can go, yeah, I was close to that. Or, oh, I had you before the river. They like saying that. But if you show the king queen, you just made fun of them. You just said, I know you can't fold rivers. So don't be surprised if you get somebody going off on you right there. You have pocket tens on the button. We raise the 3 big blinds. Small blind makes it 9. It's on you. Yeah, if you're playing on the website I like to frequent, an anonymous American-facing site that has that auto muck, it's so important because there's no embarrassment when people make a bad call, and that encourages this kind of play. So continuing here, if you're just dealing with anonymous poker in general, people don't care about how stupid they're playing because, hell, you don't know who they are. So we go ahead and call. And the board comes king 9-3. And this person bets 12.5 into 19. It's on you, fold, call, or raise. We call here. The turn is the 2 of diamonds, and he fires 25.5 into 44. What would you like to do here? Fold, call, or raise? Okay, so just so you know, the average poker player does not 3-bet bluff enough and does not double barrel bluff enough. So if you're in a hand where someone has 3-bet you and double barreled versus you, take the under. They're most likely not bluffing. So here he's probably not double barreling a 9. So you're not beating any value hands, most likely. He's probably not bluffing enough of the time from this stack size. Most likely you've just run into a hand. He has a really nice combo draw that has a ton of equity against you, or most of the time you're just up against ace-king or king-queen. Let it go. Don't overextend yourself with one pair. So here you have queens. There's 1 limper and 1 raiser to 3.5 big blinds. It's folded to you on the button. Fold, call, or raise. Well, you should be 3-betting. You most likely have the best hand right now, and villain 22 calls you. The board comes king, jack, 2. Villain 22 leads out 16.5 big blinds into you. Would you like to fold, call, or raise? We go ahead and call. The turn is the 3 of diamonds. Villain 22 checks to you. It is on you. Check or bet. We fire 19 big blinds. Villain 22 calls. The river is the king of spades. Villain 22 checks to you. It's on you. Check or bet. We move all in, and he calls, and bang, bang, you put it together. So here, going back to what we've been discussing about donk bets, a lot of your recreational opponents, and there's a lot of these people out there now, they donk lead randomly just to see where they're at. You see this a lot live, so I wanted to bring this up. There's so many more donk bets live, especially if you're playing in more recreational environments. So he leads out into you here. You don't know what the hell this is. It's a nice big boy bet. So it could be a king. This could also just be a jack trying to find out where it's at. And if you ask these people, why do they donk lead here? It's the strangest explanation in the world. I'm trying to slow you down. It's okay. I didn't expect that. So he leads 16.5 big blinds here. You don't know what this is. Now, when he checks on this turn, when there's flush draws and straight draws, that's a bit of a dangerous turn to check. So he might be doing that with a king, but a lot of people, if they're the type of people to lead a king on the flop, it's because they believe that's a hand worth protecting. They feel like top pair is a hand to go to war with. So if they're checking here as the board gets a little bit more dangerous, it's a little bit more likely it's a jack than a king. Actually, far more likely. So we go for thin value. And villain 22 goes in and calls us here. And the river's the king of spades, and villain 22 checks to us. Now here, it's so much more likely he's got a jack, just because now there's less combinations of kings in their hand. So we go ahead and go for the thin value here. It's really only overbets and all-ins tend to really get most players up in their head. But if you really think about this, it's just a 45 big blind value bet on this river. So it's really likely he's got a jack. Every once in a while, he's got a king, and that's going to stink. But we still got to go for it, and we do. And there it is. You take all of his chips. Well done. This training video has been brought to you by PokerHeadRush.com. Visit PokerHeadRush.com to sign up for the free daily strategic newsletter. When you sign up for the newsletter, you'll also get access to webinar invites first. In the webinars, you'll get access to an exclusive Q&A session where you can ask your poker strategy questions. Also, my new book is out now, available now wherever fine books are sold. Learn how to beat players who never fold. Go check that out right now. And if you've already picked it up, thank you. I very much appreciate it. If you could leave a review on Amazon, that helps me a lot. Thank you.